Hey there, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. Before we get into today's show, I have an incredibly important announcement. This is something that I really haven't been more excited to announce than all the way back in 2014 when I first started the Energy Blueprint. After well over a year of development and testing, we are finally ready to officially launch our breakthrough mitochondrial supplement to the world. This is a genuine game changer in the area of human energy enhancement, and it's called Energenesis. This is actually the first no stimulant, no caffeine, and no sugar energy formula that actually builds up your own body's capacity to produce energy. Instead of working like caffeine and stimulants by giving you a temporary boost of energy for a few hours, but ultimately making your energy levels worse over time, Energenesis actually builds up your own body's ability, your cellular capacity to produce energy. Energenesis got over 20 amazing, powerful ingredients at real effective doses. This is a premium formula that uses actual real effective doses. So this is literally like 23 supplements all in one. And with that in mind, just to mention a few testimonials that people have wrote in after using Energenesis. So this one's from Barbara. She said, I'm a 72-year-old female and I love Energenesis. I have more sustained energy through the day and I'm actually getting my life back. I'm doing things that I haven't been able to do for 10 years. Anya, she said, I really love that it gives me just the right kind of steady and balanced energy. Unlike stimulants, which I can't tolerate, Energenesis gives me a perfect, smooth kind of energy that lasts throughout the whole day. Michelle Catlin, this is one of my favorite ones. She said, Ari, are you getting tired of all the praise and requests for Energenesis yet? I'm on my third bottle and I have to tell you, I haven't felt this good in years. So if you've been struggling with your energy levels and you're looking to get this area of your life handled, and not just to get a temporary boost of energy for a few hours, but to actually transform your energy levels by building real energy at the cellular level, then go get yourself some Energenesis. You can get it at theenergyblueprint.com/Energenesis. So go to that page, check out all the ingredients and all the science behind it, how it works. It's all there. There's about 200 scientific references behind all of the different ingredients in Energenesis. They're all listed on that page, along with a lot of the science behind the ingredients. There's also a video explaining it all. Check it all out. Check out the science, then grab yourself some Energenesis and let's get started. I know that you are going to be blown away by the result. The URL is theenergyblueprint.com/Energenesis. And now let's get into the episode. Hey there, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. In this episode, we are talking with leading functional medicine practitioner, Dr. Dan Kalish, on some of his most novel and unique insights into improving mitochondrial health, which of course is vital for high energy levels. So enjoy the episode. So welcome to the show, Dr. Kalish. Such a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, super glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So in this presentation, you are going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is optimizing mitochondrial health. So I will let you take it away from here.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Yeah. So this is, it's just been a personal obsession of mine for the last 3 years. What is the role of the mitochondria? How does that relate to fatigue? How does it relate to hormone producing glands like the adrenals and the thyroid? And, how does this all fit in? And so one of the sort of big breakthroughs that has happened in the last several years is through the lab testing that we do in functional medicine, looking at mitochondrial function through what are called organic acids, as well as other tests, but primarily through organic acids, we've discovered that there's a new pattern that no one had really observed before. And this pattern is seeing very low levels of these metabolites on the labs. And in the sort of classical version of functional medicine, you're looking for high markers that show nutrient deficits that indicate that there's certain key nutrients, we'll talk a lot about them today, that are required for the mitochondria to work right. And so you can see if CoQ10 levels are wrong or off, or magnesium is not right, or B vitamins are not working right, or carnitine is not working right. That information has been around for 30 or 40 years for functional medicine docs based on organic acids testing. But the new information, which is even more exciting, is what does it mean when all of these markers are low? What does it mean when the output of the mitochondria to make these markers is low. And this is what my teacher, Dr. Richard Lord, calls a hypometabolic state, or mitochondrial retraction. It's a lack of having sufficient mitochondria to even make energy or ATP. So we can have people in two different groupings, right? We can have people that have cellular energy problems because their nutrient deficits, of magnesium, CoQ10, carnitine, whatever it may be. But then we can have even more severe fatigue, depression, and those kinds of problems when the mitochondria aren't even present in their proper numbers. And we're working a lot in the last few years with nutrient programs to stimulate the growth of mitochondria. And so that's been really exciting.
Yeah. If I can interject one thing on that subject, the work of Dr. Robert Naviaux, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but the cell danger response, as well as one particular metabolomic study where they did on chronic fatigue syndrome, where they found something like 80% of the overall markers, they measured over 600 markers, over 80% of them were depressed, were low. And this has always kind of blew my mind, because I've always felt like when we're dealing with these functional medicine tests, in many cases, people are looking at, 10 or 15 different biomarkers, and they find a few that are off and say, oh, we found the issue. It's these 3 things that are off. And I'm like, yeah, there's probably like 400 other things that are off too, if you had the tests to measure them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, to that point, when we run these ion panels, which include fatty acids, organic acids, amino acids, and every other thing you can imagine, when we run those panels on people that are hypometabolic, exactly what you just said happens. You see just this bloodbath all across the board. You see low neurotransmitter markers. You see low liver detox markers. You see really poor amino acid function. You even see bad problems with fatty acids that are all part of it, because it's not like the mitochondria are targeted specifically and that's the only problem that you have. Anything that's going to damage the mitochondria is going to oftentimes damage other systems in the body as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what do you do in cases like this? I mean, I'm sure that's the subject of this whole presentation, but kind of what does the path look like to help people who are, when it's not just, oh, your L-carnitine levels and CoQ10 levels are deficient, let's put you on a supplement for those, but you're seeing this widespread dysfunction. What is it? What does the path to recovery look like?
Yeah, and so we go back to the original functional medicine playbook, which is, what's causing this? What's actually going on underneath the surface? What's the root cause? And we're thinking that there could be environmental toxicants that are stressing the system. It could be, I guess, emotional stress. So with mitochondria, I don't usually think of that as the number one thing. It could be a genetic disorder, right? There's a lot of people that just are genetically predisposed to not have really great mitochondrial function. But the main thing that we see is some kind of oxidative stress. Could be coming from the gut, could be coming from environmental toxins, could be coming from the diet. Some kind of a overwhelming amount of oxidative stress that's in turn damaging the mitochondria. And so you got to work on this on both sides, right? And for the short term energy boost, super energy, supercharge, make you feel like $1 million kind of stuff, you dump enough amino acids and CoQ10 and magnesium and B vitamins into the system, the mitochondria will start to come back. And then in parallel, you're trying to find out, okay, where are these environmental toxins coming from? Is it a diet issue? Is it related to, something that's happening at work? Is it something from the past? Is it mercury in the person's mouth from fillings? Or is it a gut problem that's generating all this oxidative stress? And so you can run on, both tracks, trying to find the underlying cause of the oxidative stress that damaged the mitochondria while you're repairing the mitochondria at the same time.
Absolutely. Excellent. So as far as your strategies for optimizing mitochondria, are we jumping ahead too much? Do you want to sort of go into some of the background around deeper into mitochondrial health before we get into sort of the practical strategies?
Yeah, let's talk about a little bit of that. I think that's a good idea, because it's a fancy word, mitochondria. You can also think of it as cellular energy. But what you're really talking about is your metabolism, how your body takes nutrients, proteins, fats, carbs, and then burns them up for fuel. How is that all working? How's the furnace of your body working? And you can measure it with the labs. Most people can just tell based on how they're feeling whether their metabolism feels like it's in good shape or not. But the key point is that if you're having a problem with it, with your energy levels, is there, there's some lifestyle things that we're assuming people are doing, like you're exercising pretty well, you're eating pretty well, you're not exposing yourself to a lot of chemicals from your personal care products and from your cleaners you use in your home. You're kind of figuring out that we live in a really toxic world and that human beings are quite clever. We've developed, tens of thousands of chemicals, and we've been extremely clever to just release those into the environment without anyone really regulating or thinking about what the heck is going on. And so when you test people now, every newborn baby in the United States has like 50 to 70 toxins the day they're born, right? We used to think that somehow being in the womb protected you. Not true. So we're all exposed to these compounds now. Everyone is, whether you're in an industrialized country or not. And a lot of the chemical toxins, the heavy metals, and again, this could be also coming from the gut. You could be coming from poor digestion, infections, the wrong kind of food, some kind of gut generated oxidative stress. This is going to cause tissue damage, right? And mitochondria are quite sensitive, and they're very easily damaged by high levels of oxidative stress. And so when that starts to happen, we, go into sort of emergency mode in a way, right? And the body's trying to protect itself. And unfortunately, the way that we protect ourselves is by generating ATP so we can run body systems. But these environmental toxins or gut-related compounds that are damaging the mitochondria interfere with our energy production system. So it's a very critical area of the body to be damaged because it's part of how we protect ourselves, right? And so if you're actually damaging your sort of shield, then you're going to be in pretty big trouble. And I think that, for anyone who has fatigue, chronic depression, unexplained chronic pain, looking at the mitochondria, at least with some of the basic lab work that we do, makes sense as a sort of getting started analysis. And, I do a lot of these labs, and I teach a lot of classes in this, and I work with a lot of patients on the phone, and it's not always a mitochondrial problem. In fact, we'll be doing coursework with other doctors and then be like, whoa, look at those mitochondria. This is great. They don't have that problem. It's almost kind of a little surprising when we see normal mitochondria, but not everybody has this problem. I think that's important to point out. But if you do have this problem, it can easily be missed because people, that are healthcare providers could just sort of misinterpret what's happening. My last really bad mitochondrial patient last week was sort of typical in that, her doctor wanted to put her on antidepressants. And she's like, I'm not depressed. And she walked out of that office and came over to my office and did a phone consult and is trying to figure out, okay, I'm, not really energetic here, but this is not an emotional problem. And I don't want to do therapy and I don't want to take antidepressant. I want to figure out why my energy isn't so great. So I think our culture is kind of on the wrong track in terms of figuring out mitochondrial problems. If you look at conventional medicine, which is obviously why we're having these kinds of discussions, because a lot of these people that have a lot of fatigue end up drifting over to, more of a functional medicine or integrative medicine approach.
Yeah. To that point, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's a paper that was published in 2015 called Fatigue and Overview, which was published in the American Journal of Family Physician. And it was basically evidence-based guidelines for physicians, for conventional medical doctors, of how to deal with their patients with fatigue, chronic fatigue. And they found a couple of really fascinating things. One is that 95% of people with chronic fatigue will show up with no abnormalities whatsoever on their lab tests, on their conventional lab tests. That's one interesting thing. And then the 4 treatments that they have as their standard recommendations for people with fatigue are go for a walk for 30 minutes a day, walking and stretching, cognitive behavioral therapy, antidepressants, and stimulants as needed.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the best of what they've got for people with fatigue.
It's kind of sad, right? It's like, go take a walk, and if it doesn't work, we got either uppers or downers, and let's just try to fix it. It's like,
take a walk, get some psychotherapy, and if that doesn't work, we have antidepressants and stimulants.
Hey, I live in Oakland. You could just go down to the corner in a bad neighborhood in Oakland, and you could get that kind of advice pretty easily. It's probably a lot cheaper. Yeah, I don't know. We don't have to go into that whole scenario, but the thing that is important is that there's a lot of things you can do, and that there's a lot of science behind this. And it's not like a bunch of health food store clerks running around saying this is good for your energy, right? It's just that the science is not widely disseminated, and so people just don't know that these things are out there, and that you can actually test and correct mitochondrial function. That's kind of a newsflash.
Mm-hmm.
Even a lot of people, even in the integrative medicine community, aren't aware that you can actually do that.
Yeah.
So we want to do a little better, and we're not saying this is like a permanent situation for people, like you should just run out and take CoQ10 and magnesium for the rest of your life. We're really trying to diagnose and treat a specific fatigue syndrome, fix things, and then let people move on with their lives. I think that's an important thing to distinguish, in that this is not a forever kind of program for most people.
Mm-hmm. So what does this look like as far as repairing, optimizing mitochondria? What's, as far as practical strategies, how do you kind of approach that whole situation?
Yeah, so now in my practice, it's very specifically, we do these labs and I tell you exactly what you need. However, there are some general categories of things that show up consistently with a lot of people. And if you're not going to do the lab work, you can just sort of guess, I guess, and try these things and see how well they work. And there are four that we see really consistently. One is that people have deficiencies of carnitine. There's a lot of genetic reasons why some people need more carnitine than other people. There's a lot of enzymes that are involved in the processing of carnitine, and it's a very common place to have some kind of genetic thing going wrong, meaning that you may be getting enough carnitine. We typically get carnitine in adequate amounts if you're eating meat. If you're a vegan, there's some people who are vegans that don't have enough carnitine. Some vegans do just fine with it. So most people get enough carnitine in their diet. And what carnitine does, it shuttles fat. So it grabs fat molecules from storage sites and brings it over to the mitochondria where you can burn it up for energy. And so if you don't have enough carnitine, it's kind of crippling for your energy production. So that's an obvious one. And most people notice a difference with carnitine in terms of making themselves feel better in the first month of taking it, if you need it. The other, that's sort of the all-encompassing, it's involved in every one of these steps of energy production, is magnesium. And don't want to say too much about magnesium because it's, people are really familiar with it. It's not an unusual supplement, but it's very important for energy production. And then one that's paired with magnesium is, of course, CoQ10. And again, in isolation by themselves, sometimes these supplements don't work at all. But if you have either lab work or some good sort of program design behind a supplement, or you get maybe a combination product from one of the companies that sells combination products, and you have each one of these nutrients, you can get some pretty significant energy changes: carnitine, magnesium, and CoQ10. And then the final one is the tricky one, and it's the most important one, and it's oxygen. I didn't even really think about this until about 2-3 years ago, when again my current teacher, Richard Lord, who's the main scientist that started these mitochondrial labs maybe 30 or 40 years ago, he was like, "Yeah, Dan, for your mitochondria, you need CoQ10, magnesium, and oxygen." And I thought, oxygen? Like, who buys oxygen? He's like, "You don't buy it. This is called breathing, right?" And so when your mitochondrial populations are not doing well, you tend to not be running around and being super active. You tend to slump instead of sitting up straight. You tend to not have enough oxygen, and that makes the whole problem worse. Mm-hmm. And as you know, the oxygen is essential, right, for this whole electron transport chain energy production thing to happen. So in terms of lifestyle change, because in functional medicine we always want to encourage lifestyle change along with supplements, the lifestyle change is to do breathing exercises and to make sure that you're heavily oxygenating yourself, not just through exercise, which obviously causes you to breathe a little harder, but also through breathing exercises. So you saturate your system with oxygen on a regular basis.
Now, specifically, what kinds of breathing practices are you referring to? Because there's everything from, mindful breathing, of learning how to belly breathe in a calm way for the purposes of meditation and mindfulness practices, to, very intense breathing practices, holotropic breath work, breath holding practices, things like that. So what specifically are you referring to?
Yeah, well, I have a personal bias on this one. And I think there seems to be some science to back this up, but this goes back 5,000 years to what the Taoists do, right? And so I've been doing this Taoist meditation for 10 years now. And it's not like gentle, easy breathing, I'm not against that. That's a great thing. If you're if you're just not breathing deeply, then just taking deep breaths is going to help. If you really want to get into it, you can challenge your breathing, kind of like with exercise. People do resistance training, and then they do like intervals, and it's like intervals but with breathing. So just give a couple of simple examples. First of all, the obvious one is you take a deep breath in and hold it. I've only been able to get to 2 minutes, but that's an interesting experience right there. And then the other is to take a breath in, breathe all the way out, and hold it out. That is even more interesting if you want to try that. And then the other obvious ones are just, your deep breathing, where you're breathing in, holding for a few seconds, breathing out. The idea being that I think like with exercise, you're not just taking a walk every day. Some days you run up a hill. Some days you do weights. Some days, you're mixing it up with your breathing, and you're stressing the system by withholding oxygen and triggering this whole because you want to make it so that you're breathing deeply all the time, but you don't have to think about it. That's what I'm trying to say, right? So you're breaking up these patterns that we have where we don't breathe very deeply by making yourself aware of how important it is to have oxygen. I'll tell you, if you try holding your breath for 2 minutes, you will become very aware of how important oxygen is. So I do these exercises every day for a couple hours, and lo and behold, the rest of the day I'm breathing pretty well because
did you say you do them for a couple hours of breathing practices?
Yeah, a couple
hours.
Now,
are you just doing the breathing practices and nothing else, or are you doing them while you're working and doing other things?
It's while I'm doing the Taoist meditation. It's a component of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Got it.
Like if you were in the gym working out, you would say, well, yeah, I'm breathing, but I'm doing my workout. It's kind of like that.
Gotcha. Now, is this something related to Qigong, or just for people who are interested in your Taoist meditation? Where might they learn about that?
It's very much along the lines of Qigong. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
Is that something you teach, or would you refer some out to a book or any particular source for learning that?
This year, we're launching a whole system on Taoist meditation teaching.
Your secret's safe with me and 100,000 or so people listening.
Well, yeah, and it's the coolest stuff. And then the thing about the Taoists I really love is that they figured out how to take care of their mitochondria like 5,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. I mean, they're not doing these things randomly. They were trying to extend life, right? A lifespan. That was one of their main goals. How do you live to be 100, 200 years old? And one of the things they figured out is it's really important that you figure out this breathing and how can you stimulate and produce mitochondrial health through breathing, just through trial and error, And,
yeah. Interesting. Yeah, there's a whole, you may or may not know this. This is something that's something I kind of stumbled across well after I started looking into many years after I learned about lots of breathing practices, many years after I started learning about mitochondria, because it's all pretty much Russian research and most of it's in Russian. But there's a whole bunch of research on intermittent hypoxic training, which is various kinds of breath holding practices. And there's even some research specifically talking about intermittent hypoxic training and how it relates to mitochondrial health.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually this group that I connected with last year, and they're doing this, but they have they put you on a treadmill and they give you a mask and then they control the amount of oxygen that you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
So they can mimic, you being on the top of Mount Everest or you being saturated with oxygen. They can go. And one of the things they're doing is, getting people to work out and then restricting the amount of oxygen that they're able to get to create this effect like you're talking about with the Russian researchers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's profound. So you mentioned magnesium, carnitine, CoQ10, oxygen, breathing practices. Are there any other things you want to mention? I know that one of the things we talked about before we started recording was mTOR stimulation, and you've mentioned some things along the lines of that and amino acids. I'm really curious to hear about what you're doing there.
Yeah, now this is pretty deep. And this is, you can take this the wrong way. So mTOR stands for what? Mammalian target of rapamycin.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, in general, most of the research community that's looked at mTOR is concerned about mTOR and wants to slow mTOR down because mTOR stimulates cell growth, which could accelerate aging and put you at high risk for cancer, right? So most of the research around mTOR is around slowing it down as a way to extend life. Mm-hmm. And what Dr. Lord determined in the last probably 5-10 years is looking at mitochondrial function. Sometimes we want to stimulate cellular repair And we want to speed up the body's ability to generate these organelles like mitochondria. Now, not doing it, if you had cancer, you wouldn't want to do this, right? Because this could make you worse. But we can actually stimulate mTOR by giving single large dosages of free-form amino acids. 7 to 9 grams, usually about 2 teaspoons of a free-form amino acid powder. And you do that once a day, maybe twice a day if you're really gung-ho, on an empty stomach, and you'll start to stimulate the repair of mitochondria by stimulating mTOR with these free-form aminos. And this goes way back to like 40 years ago when Dr. Lord and Dr. Braley first started a lab called Metametrics, which is gone now, but they sold their lab a little while ago. But in the early days of these amino acid testing programs they were doing, I guess, like in the 80s, they found that these amino acids, these free-form amino acids, helped with so many different health conditions. And now the scientific research is being sort of conducted in the last maybe 10 years to show the mechanism of that is actually stimulating mTOR. Which is fascinating when we think about it. And this is why so many people for so long have benefited from taking free-form amino acids. But the trick is you got to do it at 7 to 9 grams in a single dose in order to get this mTOR stimulating effect. And it works better on an empty stomach.
So a couple questions. One, I definitely don't take this the wrong way. I'm of the belief, which I think should be really non-controversial, that mTOR is neither good nor bad. It, like AMPK, like a lot of things in the body, like various hormones, it's good when it's in the appropriate amount and activated at the appropriate times. And to suppress mTOR all the time is a really horrible idea because mTOR, as you're alluding to, mTOR serves many vital roles as far as anabolic cell building, tissue building processes that are a necessary part of good health. The same is true with like IGF-1. IGF-1 has been demonized heavily. It's like, if you have too high levels of IGF-1, then that's linked with increased risk of cancer and death. But what a lot of people don't talk about is too low of IGF-1 levels are similarly linked with increased risk of death. And there's a whole middle ground of optimal range. I think the same principle is true of mTOR and pretty much everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
So specifically on free-form amino acids, there's a whole bunch of research around like branch chain amino acids in the context of bodybuilding and things of that nature. And there were many benefits that were sort of theorized about why you would want to use free-form branch chain amino acids. And almost all of the research that's put it to the test has found that consuming whole protein with equivalent amounts of branch chain amino acids basically gives the same degree of benefits. And there doesn't seem to be really any significant additional benefits from consuming the free-form branch chain amino acids. So I'm wondering we can stimulate mTOR through just consuming whole food protein, from consuming meat or eggs or fish, from consuming protein powders, whether whey protein or plant food, pea protein and hemp protein and things like that. Why specifically do you feel free-form amino acids are uniquely beneficial?
Yeah, so the research, and this is all in Dr. Lord's lectures, I can send you a copy of it later, on the hypometabolic state. But for specific stimulation of mTOR, and by the way, this is only done based on labs, right? So this is only done in people who have these patterns of extremely low mitochondrial markers, right? We don't just wake up and decide to give people tons of amino acids. Only done in people where you can demonstrate that there's a problem with a deficiency of these markers, right? These markers are all very low. But the free-form amino acids in the 7 to 9 gram range have a different effect than trying to do it with food. I can get you links to all the research on that. You can read about it.
Yeah, please. I would love to.
Yeah,
that'd be great. I'm curious, have you also heard of lipid replacement therapy, Garth Nicholson's research?
I don't know about that.
Okay, so there's some really, you'd definitely be fascinated by this. There's some really great research around these specific phospholipid formulations that they're using that seem to get transported intact to our cells and to our mitochondrial membranes, where they replace damaged phospholipids in the mitochondrial membranes. And there's some pretty darn remarkable and impressive research, again, mainly from this researcher, Garth Nicholson. I think it's Garth Nicholson. Yeah. Who has, if you Google like lipid replacement therapy, there's a literature review of this on its relationship to treating people with different kinds of chronic fatigue, showing really massive improvements in energy levels in span of 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks of just taking this one phospholipid supplement. So
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so we do something similar with the ion panels. Is we're measuring, omega-3, omega-6, omega-9, all those fatty acids. And the curious thing is, you would think that most people are low in threes and the sixes are either high or normal, but there's certain people who are low in omega-6, or they may have a odd fat like palmitic that's really low. And sometimes we'll get very targeted. It's a little different than what you're describing, but same vein of prescribing high dosages of omega-6, or prescribing something to try to fix palmitic that's out of balance, or people that have arachidonic, like you're saying, like high or low, and there's a range for all these things and everything. Some people having super high arachidonic that you would think would be related to inflammation and problems. Then some people having really low arachidonic, which can also cause problems. So I'm doing a lot of work with the cell membrane, so I'll check that out because this is a lot of interest to me right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Happy to send you the literature, but easy to find.
Yep.
You have in your slide presentation some interesting slides on what you called awesome energy versus exhausted energy. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so a little bit different topic here, right? So we're thinking about when your energy production is working right, and this is what we all learn in biochemistry or physiology class, is you get 38 units of ATP for each turn of this energy production wheel, right? So imagine you're pulling in protein, fat, and carbs, you're trying to make energy, and if that whole system's working beautifully, on average, you should be generating 38 units of energy. Now, if you're in a catabolic state, if you're in a breakdown state, if for some reason your blood sugar's unstable, you don't have the ability to burn fat, you have all these phospholipid problems and your fat burning is off, or your carnitine is off, or something like that is happening, and you're going to alternate energy pathways. Some of these energy pathways, you can only generate 2 ATP, right? Some of them, you even get a net loss of energy to make energy, right? These are the people that I talk to. They're like, I walk, up the stairs, and I'm just exhausted just by the time I get to the top of the stairs, right? And so a lot of the fatigue that we see is because people are not able to get into what we call aerobic respiration, right? They're not able to make the normal energy in the normal way. And they're going into the body is adaptable. When those systems break down and the mitochondria can't work, let's say you don't have enough CoQ10, right? It would be a simple example. Or you don't have enough tryptophan or something like that is going on. Then all of a sudden you're going to have a major problem and have to shift to making energy from other sources. And it's just not an efficient way to do things.
Mm-hmm.
So people they get by, but they get by in a way that's not exactly uplifting. They're not exactly jumping out of bed and wanting to exercise. They're going through this whole other way of producing energy and just netting out a very, very small amount of energy. And it just shows that, if we can fix those things, you can get that person back to just making the normal production of energy is a huge amount of energy. It's another way of saying it, right? You don't have to jack someone up on steroids or something and give them an artificial boost. Just the normal functioning mitochondria is an abundant and endless source of energy for human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I know we talked a bit about before we started recording. You mentioned that you could talk a bit in depth on tests and the most ideal tests for assessing mitochondrial function. You've alluded to some tests thus far already, but can you kind of give a rundown on if somebody wants to know if they have damaged mitochondria or dysfunctional mitochondria, or just they've lost a lot of mitochondria over time through the course of aging, which happens to the vast majority of people. What are the best tests to assess mitochondrial function?
Yeah, so I think the starting point, the central point, is organic acids. And there are several different lab companies that run these in slightly different ways. And through organic acids, you can measure the metabolic byproducts of all these different processes, and they'll tell you very clearly if you need CoQ10 or carnitine or various B vitamins and amino acids and how all those systems are working. So organic acids is usually sort of the central point. And then if you want to dig a little deeper and figure out, okay, if I don't have great mitochondrial function, well, what's going on with my oxidative stress? So many of these lab companies will have a combination profile, like an ion profile is the one I use, where you also look at oxidative stress. You also look at other factors that relate to energy production, liver detoxification capacity. You want to have a general sense of, is your liver able to clear things adequately? Because if not, then that builds up in terms of oxidative stress. And then, of course, the microbiome is all we can talk about these days in integrative and functional medicine. So you want to make sure your microbiome is working well, that your gut is in good shape. So those are the kind of the bigger picture ones. Organic acids is the center point, probably the single most important. And then you want to figure out the toxin burden and the oxidative stress markers and that kind of stuff. And then separate, you want to make sure that the microbiome of the gut is working well. That's the typical workup that I do in my practice.
Excellent. So this has been phenomenal. I'm wondering if you could wrap up with sort of the summary and the sort of list of practical strategies for people to implement to improve their mitochondrial health.
Yeah. So either you're going to do I divide it into two categories. You're either going to do lab-based program or non-lab-based. So if you're going to do a non-lab-based program and you're just guessing, then I think these things are safe to guess at. I don't think you do any harm if you do this for a few months. Carnitine, CoQ10, magnesium, and oxygen, which is the breathing, right? And making sure that you're getting your life cleaned up in terms of not drinking alcohol, not doing caffeine, not being exposed to a lot of toxins, and get a sauna, do some steam room stuff, get sweat out the toxins, do a lot of exercise, that kind of thing. So going on a health kick and seeing if you can sort of reset your mitochondrial function that way. And if that's not working and you're 3 or 4 months into it and you're like, wow, how much more of this stuff can I take if nothing's happening, then get an organic acids lab and find a doc that knows how to interpret them well and see if there's an obvious issue there. Not everybody, as I said earlier, not everybody has mitochondrial problems, but it's something you can figure out, spending maybe $300 or $400 on lab work. Definitively, you'll figure it out quite quickly.
Beautiful. And I know you're accepting patients right now. And so where can people, if they want to get in touch with you and work with you, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a phone consultation practice, work with patients all over the world, and that's kalishwellness.com, Kalish, kalishwellness.com. And if people are curious, they can come and talk. I have a intake coordinator that can speak with you for 15 minutes for free and kind of let you know what our practice is about. If you're just curious, you want to check it out, you can schedule with her.
Beautiful. And it's kalishwellness.com.
Yep.
We'll probably have a link to it. It's on one of the slides. So if you guys are watching the video while you're listening to this, you'll see it there. So Dr. Kalish, thank you so much for coming on. It's such a pleasure to have you. It's also a great pleasure to connect with you after following your work for 20 years since I was a teenager.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much. I'm glad you're doing this. Getting the information out there is great.
Most definitely. Thank you so much. Hey there, this is Ari again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you found it valuable, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, help me get the word out there. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to get notifications every time we release a new video or new episode of the podcast. And if you're listening to this, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for supporting my work at the Energy Blueprint. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next one.